In 1910, built by a Romanian nobody had even heard of. That's right, the Balkan country that gave Count Dracula an insula to the world has quite an interesting and unexpected aviation history. Today we'll be talking about the dreams of one man that were far, and I mean far ahead of its time. The incredible Romanian jet-powered biplane. Fixated on this new bold idea, Coanda moved to turn his theory into reality. In 1910, he designed and built his unique aeroplane in France, likely drawing on the resources from the Paris Aero School and workshops where he had connections. He even worked briefly at Gustave Eiffel's facilities in Nice. If you haven't caught up, that's the guy who built the Eiffel Tower. The aircraft was completed in time to be showcased at the Second International Aeronautical Expedition in Paris in the autumn of 1910. This was a two-seat biplane, more precisely, a sesquiplane. Which sounds very similar to sexy plane, but that's definitely not the case. A sesquiplane is an aircraft with an upper wing longer than the lower, and Coanda's brainchild was constructed with a mix of wood and steel. He spent no effort in making his creation as advanced as possible. The fuselage was built with a steel frame and wood and then covered in a polished lacquered plywood for smooth aerodynamics. At a time when most planes were basically cloth-covered frames that looked like kites, Coanda's machine had the streamlined look of something from the future. Inside that fuselage was the heart of his invention, a novel turbo-propulsion engine. Pardon my French. In essence, it was a ducted fan powered by a conventional piston engine. Coanda used a 50 horsepower cloquet 4-cylinder engine, which drove a centrifugal turbine enclosed in the nose of the aircraft. The turbine would suck in air, compress it, and send it rushing towards the back. His idea was to mix the hot exhaust from the engine with this airflow to increase thrust. His French patent in October of 1910 described heating the air channels to expand the air and produce more force. In modern terms, this was not quite a true jet combustion chamber, but it was a big leap beyond propellers, effectively an early motor jet design. The whole apparatus, a turbina, or turbine. His aircraft had no propeller, and all the magic happened inside of the fuselage. Apart from the engine, the fuselage and control surfaces were quite eye-catching as well. The aircraft featured a St. Andrews cross-shaped tail, which is essentially a pair of tail fins set at 45 degrees, forming an X shape. This cruciform tail had both vertical and horizontal stabilizer functions, with the pilot being able to control it with two steering wheels in the cockpit. Turning both wheels at the same direction moved the tail up or down for pitch, while turning them the opposite would swivel it side to side for the yaw. The landing gear combined wheels with skis. Two main wheels carried most of the weight, but Coanda added a front skid and rear skid to prevent nosovers and support the tail. Some reports even suggest he experimented with retractable landing gears, although it's unclear if it worked. His aircraft even featured internal fuel and oil tanks in the wings, which was a first in aviation history and a design choice which is nowadays common. The upper wing was quite thick and structurally strong, enabling this innovation. And each of these innovations was remarkable because, let me remind you, this is 1910, and all of these things taken together made the Coanda 1910 a truly exotic flying machine. It was heavier than those other flimsy planes of its era, with about 420 kilograms of empty weight, and it was also quite large, exactly 12.5 meters long with a 10.3 meters wingspan. But Coanda was confident that the turbina engine with its 50 horsepower motor could provide enough thrust to make it fly. And now it was time to prove it. In October of 1910, Coanda took his new aircraft to the Paris Air Saloon at the Grand Palais. The saloon was the era's premier air show, where the latest flying inventions were displayed to the public and press. Coanda's propeller-less plane caused quite an immediate sensation. French newspapers wrote articles about it, and engineers and other designers talked all about it. On December 16, 1910, Henri brought the Coanda 1910 to the military airfield near Paris for experimental trials. This was his moment to prove that his concept worked. The goal was modest: do some taxi runs on the field to test the engine. Coanda's own recollections of that day paint a vivid picture of the first jet flight that quickly turned into a fiery inferno. According to a letter that he wrote years later, after warming up the engine, he started rolling down a field, and the machine accelerated more and more. To his surprise, the aircraft lifted off a bit too quickly, seemingly on its own accord. Henry was caught off guard by how suddenly he was airborne, and at this critical moment, the inexperienced pilot lost full control. The airplane yawed and slipped to the side, and then came down hard, crashing into a wall at the edge of the field and bursting into flames. It was all over in moments. He was incredibly lucky to survive. In an era with no seatbelts or enclosed cockpits, the crash mercifully threw him out of the aircraft before it was consumed by the fire. It was a dramatic end to the world's first experiment with a hybrid jet-powered aeroplane. The prototype was completely destroyed by the crash and fire, putting an end to Coanda's jet-age dreams. Well, at least for the time being. In the case of this accident, he also observed something scientifically extraordinary. He noted that when he tried an earlier run, the engine's twin exhaust outlets would split in flames so intensely that he felt them in the cockpit. So he improvised a solution by attaching shields above and below to deflect the flames away. On the final attempt, those flame detectors produced an unexpected effect. The flames didn't shoot out straight, instead they started to deviate and come out against the fuselage. Coanda was astonished to see the fiery exhaust hugging the sides of his aeroplane's fuselage. Busy not trying to crash, he didn't investigate further at that moment, but this curious behavior of the airflow would occupy his mind for 2 decades. Coanda studied this phenomenon in depth and fully described it, and today it is known as the Coanda effect. The tendency of a fluid jet to stick to the surface and follow its contour. This effect has since become a fundamental principle of fluid dynamics with countless engineering applications. How poetic that it was first noticed amid the flames of a crashing experimental plane in 1910. The aftermath of the first flight test was, unfortunately, a quiet one. There were no journalists present to record the event, and no contemporary news reports appeared about the crash. It seems Coanda's claim to the first jet flight went largely unnoticed at the time, overshadowed perhaps by winter weather and the fact that officially no successful flight was actually made. Nonetheless, in Coanda's memory and Romanian history, December 1910 marks a pioneering moment, the first attempt to fly a jet, or rather, a hybrid jet-propelled aeroplane. While the prototype perished in that trial by fire, its legacy lived on, growing brighter with time. Henri Coandă moved himself onto other endeavours in aviation. And no, while he didn't build another jet, he actually did apply his talents to a more conventional aircraft. He joined the Bristol Aeroplane Company in the UK as a technical director and designed several successful aeroplanes with propellers. One of these, the Bristol Coanda monoplane, became known as a top aircraft of its day, used by multiple countries, including Romania, just before World War I. The idea of jet propulsion would resurface decades later. In the late 1930s and 40s, engineers like Frank Whittle and Hans von Ohain developed the first true turbojet engines, leading to the first jet flights during World War II. By then, Coanda's 1910 experiment was largely forgotten outside of Romania. However, he himself never actually forgot, and Romania never forgot. In the 1950s and 60s, he recounted his story of the 1910 jet plane, ensuring its place in the history books. However, there was some controversy. His own descriptions had evolved over the years, leading skeptics to question the details. But regardless of whether that 1910 hop was a true sustained flight or a brief uncontrolled leap, perhaps never leaving ground effect, the Coanda 1910 stands as a milestone because it proved that an aircraft could be designed to fly without a propeller and using the thrust of gases alone. In Romania, Coanda is revered as a national hero of science and engineering. The main international airport of Bucharest proudly bears his name today. In 2001, a full-size replica of the original aircraft was built and displayed in the National Military Museum of Romania in Bucharest. So if you ever visit Romania, you can flex your knowledge and visit the museum and recognize this amazing feat of engineering. Coanda's jet wasn't a true turbojet. It was basically a piston engine turning a centrifugal blower inside of a duct, a primitive motor jet. That setup lost a lot of power to friction and heating. So instead of 50 horsepower that he had on paper, maybe only 40 horsepower made it into the airflow. To get it off the ground, his 480-kilogram biplane would need to have well over 100 kilograms of thrust. In reality, the duck could only deliver maybe 50 or 60. In other words, enough to taxi fast and maybe bounce off the ground for a second, but nowhere near enough for proper sustained flight.